Welcome to the Cove Podcast, your stop for PME on the go.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to the Cove Podcast. I'm Captain Todd Leppi, your regular host. On today's episode, we're going to talk about all things Exercise Talisman Sabre. I'm recording live from the Combined Joint Information Bureau up at Gallipoli Barracks with an operations officer from the exercise control for the exercise. Squadron Leader Zac Smit, thanks for joining me.
Thanks, Todd. It's a real privilege to be here, not just to represent Talisman Sabre, but to represent Air Force on the Cove Podcast.
That's right, yeah. You are my fourth. You will potentially drop before SEAC, but you are my fourth RAF officer or soldier on the podcast. So, yeah, genuinely welcome.
Thank you, mate. I'm going to claim that.
Yeah, and also you've done Hangar 46, so you have a little bit of you've hosted Hangar 46, so you've sat in my seat and realised how easy this part is, just asking questions of a guest. So, yeah, it should be really good.
Certainly feeling the pressure today, mate.
Yeah, good. Hey, all right. So I suppose Exercise Talisman Sabre. A number of people and listeners would have participated in the exercise, definitely, and had a small part in the larger COG. So the first question I want to ask is: this is your bread and butter, right? You've been doing this for some time. Like, when did you start planning Talisman Sabre before going in as the current operations officer in the XCon? And I suppose how long does it take to plan such a large exercise?
Yeah, so I posted into the JOC J73 in January, and the JOC J73 is the lead planning agency for the ADF when it comes to Talisman Sabre. Coming in January, I walked straight into finalising the execution plan for the final planning conference. And to give you a scope of the scale of the final planning conference as an example, we're talking 800 people from all 19 partner nations present in that conference here at Gallipoli Barracks. We had to set up an entire deployable facility just to fit everyone into the same room to achieve planning. Same goes with a deployable mess just to fit everyone in the same eating hall during those breaks.
How many people are in your planning conferences as you go through and step through this? You talked about partner nations, and I'll get to that in a few questions' time. But how many people are in these massive planning conferences that you're sort of conducting?
Yeah, so 800 people was the number we're rolling off for the final planning conference. The number was roughly the same for the mid-planning conference, which was hosted back in 2024 in November, around about 700 people. And yeah, as you can appreciate, we're bringing those people in from all across Australia, but as well all across the world. We're having to bring them onto bases, give them access to ICT systems where appropriate, and there's a humongous logistical effort just to conduct a planning conference for something like Talisman Sabre.
Just absolutely huge. Before we come on an episode, we obviously walked through some of the rooms in which most of the exercise was controlled or supported, being that medically or logistically, just huge scale. I've never seen something so big. If we come back to, so my social media would be full of Talisman Sabre content because of the public affairs officers and some of the units that are putting out some amazing stuff about trying to get out what the amazing stuff we're doing. I've seen footage of helicopters over the top of ferries in Sydney Harbour conducting special forces operations, HIMARS being fired from Darwin, Mount Bundy training area, to Bradshaw, and then Three Nations sort of conducting a parachute insertion into North Queensland, having flown by C-17 from Alaska, and the next time they get out of that aircraft is over North Queensland. Huge scale. I suppose if we can just go, before we get into partner nations and what we're actually getting after, can we talk about where have we got people and assets for the entire exercise? How large is this geographically?
The scale of Talisman Sabre from a geographic perspective is difficult to comprehend, and in some cases it can be quite difficult to describe. We've seen forces operating all the way out to the west on Christmas Island, through RAF Base Learmonth in the vicinity of Exmouth up northwestern Australia. As we progress further east, we've had elements operating in RAF Base Curtin, Bradshaw Field Training Area, Mount Bundy Training Area, up into Darwin and the port of Darwin. In addition to that, we've had the North Australia exercise area being utilised by not just one but two carrier strike groups as part of the Maritime component. And then as we push further to the east, Townsville Field Training Area, Shoalwater Bay Training Area, a number of non-defence training areas through Central and North Queensland. Coming down the coast towards Sydney, as you identified, we had our special operations component operating within Sydney Harbour, and then as well live fire activities occurring off the south coast of New South Wales.
Yeah, and how far is the Navy stretching out along the sea? Like, how far are we getting out? You talked about Christmas Island before, and we've got assault groups. Sort of, how large is this in terms of the maritime component, which is one of the lines of effort?
The maritime component for Talisman Sabre 2025 is extremely large. We're talking, in some cases, 1/3 of the training audience, the number of participants being within that maritime component, spread across the northwest shelf of Australia within those carrier strike groups, and as well across the east coast with 2 amphibious task groups operating in vicinity of Shoalwater Bay training area.
Yeah. So we've zoomed out from Brisbane and the large planning conferences to this huge area of operations that's sort of controlled from this location. If we come back to, so that's people and assets spread across the globe effectively, but definitely in our near region. That sort of exemplifies how large of a scale the exercise is. But I suppose what I want to talk to next is like, how is it different to the last one? So that's what we're trying to build on each of the iterations. You talked about one of the first inceptions of Talisman Sabre and what the objectives were, and we'll get into the current objectives in a minute. But how is this different to the last exercise Talisman Sabre?
Well, one point I'll quickly make that I missed as part of the ground brief is the fact we're operating outside of Australian territory for the first time within Papua New Guinea, which is a really exciting development for the ADF more broadly, but definitely as a Talisman Sabre objective to start pushing exercise activities outside of the Australian mainland.
Who have we got in PNG? Like who's currently operating PNG as part of the exercise?
Yeah, so the focus for the PNG activity is based on a special operations component working in conjunction with the United States and PNG Defence Force, and they're undertaking a joint personnel recovery activity along the north coast from Wewak through Madang and then down into Lae, undertaking a variety of different recovery methods, something that you might see should one of our aircrew be shot down over PNG one day in the future. It's demonstrating the type of recovery that would be required to return that person back to Australia safely.
Yeah, and you talked about Lae. I suppose if we link it to some of the historical episodes we've done, we've operated in PNG in 1942 and beyond. We've done a few episodes on Lae and the Pacific campaign more broadly. So it's going back to that sort of historical component. I think. Sorry. So the how is this? So if we get back to sort of the difference between last Talisman Sabre and this one, like what are we sort of getting after that we weren't, or like how is it different to the last Talisman Sabre?
So the objectives for Talisman Sabre between 2023 and 2025 have remained much the same, and I'm happy to speak about them in a moment's time. In terms of how we've gone about undertaking Talisman Sabre, we've shifted away from what was once a combined joint force entry operation undertaken in a series of tactical boxes, which effectively saw that operation undertaken concurrently across all domains. As Talisman Sabre has grown in scale and as well in terms of the number of participants and capabilities, it's very difficult to stitch together a scenario or a single scenario like a combined joint force entry operation like we had done previously. So it is different in that manner, and the way that we've had to design the exercise and then plan the exercise is different as well.
So, and you were talking about basically boxing certain objectives or tactical actions. That's impossible at this sort of scale. So you're talking about synchronizing or stitching all of that together. Is that a basic understanding of how it's sort of you're trying to make that work?
Yeah, so there is a general idea when it comes to the scenario around Talisman Sabre, but it is very generic in nature so that each component of the exercise can design their own specific scenario that enables them to get after their own individual combined joint training objectives.
So that objectives leads me straight into the next amazing segue. But so what are the objectives of the current Talisman Sabre? Like what are we trying to get after? And I suppose it all boils down to some things, but one of the things is solving problems that we can't quite solve. Like what are the objectives we're getting after for Talisman Sabre 25?
Yep, so the first objective for Talisman Sabre 2025 is strategic messaging. The fact that we can bring 18 other nations here to Australia to exercise the third objective, which is combined joint warfighting, is in itself a massive outcome for Australia and for the Australian Defence Force more specifically. We've got nations that have joined us from all over the world, and I'm sure we'll talk about them in just a moment. But the fact that they're willing to come here to Australia certainly sends a message to the broader region as to the willingness and the level of commitment from across all nations to come together and undertake combined joint warfighting.
Yeah, I think I'll list them off now because it seems like a logical point. But Canada, France, Fiji, Germany, India, Indonesia, Japan, Netherlands, New Zealand, PNG obviously, and we're over there as well, Philippines, Republic of Korea, Singapore, Thailand, Tonga, the United Kingdom, and obviously the United States as well. There are so many partners that are getting involved. And as part of the objectives, I suppose, that's that first component of the objectives.
Yeah, that's right. It's a massive effort, and we've got countries travelling from far and wide, like you've already listed out there, from Northern Europe all the way across to the continental United States and everywhere in between, particularly within our own region. It's awesome to have them come here, but as well, a lot of them don't actually realise the challenge in getting here until they actually undertake it. And for that reason, quite often we see nations come and observe for a year. So a couple of nations that we haven't mentioned on that list are Malaysia and Vietnam, who came along to Talisman Sabre 2025 to observe and understand exactly what it takes to operate on an exercise like Talisman Sabre, potentially with the intention of returning as participants in the future.
Because it's like I think the logistical constraints, just getting your equipment here. If the first challenge is getting all the people here. Obviously, the next, I did Project Convergence in 22, and we had the second iteration, so it was slightly larger, but just the complexities of getting the purse in visas and into the sort of training area to start getting after it, with the understanding or sort of hope that we would then send a battery or a full squadron of armoured CRVs or something. This takes so much time, and the logistics burden and the people that have been working on the logistics component have been working for since April, I think you said. Is that true?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, so the component, the Combined Joint Theatre Support component, came together in April and achieved IOC in May, and they've been working almost 24/7 since May to achieve what we've just seen take place on Talisman Sabre. Within that team is a dedicated cell looking at national entry with other government agencies such as the Department of Agricultural, Fisheries and Forestry, alongside the Australian Border Force. They're focused on ensuring that it's a coordinated effort, bringing all of those countries and their equipment into Australia. There's not any other activity that I can imagine that is at the scale of Talisman Sabre that puts such pressure on our airports and ports in such a short space of time.
Yeah, and I think when you look at over the command post that I talked about before, this is just massive scale, but there's people in uniform, not in uniform, in polos, in different, you have liaison officers from state and territories, and also operating off a number of states and territories, but then federal government employees as well. How many enablers are on the outside that aren't in uniform and continue to, I suppose they're in your command post as liaison officers?
Difficult to put a number on the exact number of enablers that we have across the entire exercise. Certainly within our command post here at Gallipoli Barracks, we would be in excess of 100 different types of enablers in terms of raw bodies. In terms of the number of organisations listed, we would have every partner nation obviously here and represented, but on top of that, representation from across all of our health jurisdictions, looking at how we're engaging with hospitals and emergency retrieval across the exercise area. Certainly representation from state and territory police forces and the Australian Federal Police, and in addition to those other government agencies I mentioned before around national entry, and now as we start looking to the back end of the exercise, national exit.
That's the strategic messaging component, and I do want to come back to integrating with partner nations now that there are so many. But before we do that, that's only one of the objectives and the first component. What was the posture being the second? Can we talk about posture as an objective for Talisman Sabre 2025?
Yeah, certainly. Posture really sees, from my perspective, the operationalisation of a key component of the National Defence Strategy, which is ensuring that we're setting our immediate theatre ready for crisis and then moving into conflict. So I've already spoken about one of the components that plays a key part in that, and that is the Combined Joint Theatre Support component. We also have, alongside them, operating the Combined Joint Theatre Medical component, which again are providing health effects across the entire theatre.
And they're trying to, I suppose, with the medical component, they're trying to sort of, you talked about working with a number of government and state government, federal government and territory organisations, plus all of these coalition and partnering nations. They're trying to reduce that burden on the medical system as well, and trying to get the best health support for the entire contingent. Is that fair to say that it's a tough job, right?
It's an extremely tough job, particularly in the current climate. Any one of your listeners, any one of your Australian listeners would have a very good appreciation for the pressure that's on the civilian health system right across Australia. And since we've been in execution for Talisman Sabre, we have seen civilian hospitals call Code Brown, which effectively means that they're at capacity. That has an impact onto the exercise and onto ADF operations more broadly. So the role of the Combined Joint Theatre Medical component really is to understand the demand that we're putting onto the civilian health system as we are looking to evacuate our own casualties out of the exercise area and place them into more enhanced or extended care, we're working with those jurisdictions to understand exactly what hospitals are best placed from a capacity and capability perspective to ensure that, one, we're getting the best care required for that injured person, but on top of that, that we're not simply adding to the burden of some of these regional hospitals that are, like I've already mentioned, operating at capacity already.
I think it epitomises it on a tactical level with the parachute jump in, 3 nations jumping, and I've only read open source stuff, so I'm not all over the operational component of it, but 3 nations jumping into a non-defence training area in Townsville or close to Townsville, all providing their own medical support on a somewhat risky exercise. Everyone would argue that there is a level of risk with jumping into a sort of drop zone. Having their own organic med support already there and everything in place to be able to support that. It is a huge undertaking just for that single component, let alone the remainder of the entire exercise in more broadly.
Yeah, I would say it would be difficult to achieve an activity like a airborne insertion within a single service exercise. Like when we look at the capabilities we had to bring to bear just to support that activity, you've already mentioned different health enablers from across different nations. There's a lot of policy untangling that's required to ensure that our health practitioners can actually perform their role here in Australia, and everything from including to bringing their drugs in and using those drugs right through to ensuring that they actually are authorised to legally provide healthcare to other members. In addition to that, we're looking at a number of air medical evacuation assets. There is a known risk when it comes to airborne insertion in particular, a known risk with regard to incurring casualties. We expect casualties to occur, and on both activities, we did see casualties occur on Talisman Sabre, thankfully at the lower end of the scale, but it certainly demonstrated the need to ensure that from a health perspective that we're tied in well with those other nations and with the civilian health jurisdictions.
Yeah, I hijacked your posture point when you talked about support and then health support. If we come back to the objective of posture, sort of more broadly, what are we sort of getting after?
It's helping us as an ADF and more broadly as a department understand exactly what it takes to operate in some of our northern bases and more broadly across places like Christmas Island, places like PNG, exactly the logistical requirements to not just deploy to those locations, but sustain operations in those locations. You can't just roll down the road to a Bunnings or to a Woolworths in a lot of these places. You have to bring everything you need to fight with you. And then once you're there, you have to be able to sustain the fight moving forward. So posture is all about, one, understanding what we need to bring. And then the second part of posture is ensuring we understand exactly how we're going to sustain an extended fight from that location.
Yeah, I think we'll come to the lessons learned at the end, but there would be a lot inside that objective about how much you can learn about trying to do that. I suppose the third objective is joint warfighting, and this is what people would naturally think of when they think of Exercise Talisman Sabre or large-scale exercise. Can we just talk about that objective and what the sort of goals were inside that objective?
Yep. So the combined joint warfighting objective for Talisman Sabre is split up across the various warfighting domains, air, land, maritime, cyber, space. Also within that, there's a objective aligned with amphibious operations, live fire exercises. You would imagine that on an exercise like Talisman Sabre that multi-domain operations are an inherent and natural thing, but you can tell already from the way I've described those objectives that it does take a bit of effort to ensure that we're bringing the full force of the ADF to apply in achieving those objectives. And we achieve that through some significant activities, like I've already mentioned with regards to combined joint force entry operations from an airborne insertion perspective. Obviously, you're seeing integration there between air and land. Same goes with amphibious operations, of which there were significant amphibious operations occurring on the East Coast, seeing the integration there between maritime and land. And then more broadly, some significant integration activities occurring between air and maritime forces in the Northwest Shelf and off the East Coast. We saw air and land integration occurring as well with regards to JTAC activities up and down the East Coast with the special operations component. So combined joint warfighting is is just that. It's combined. It involves many nations. It's joint because it involves more than one service. But it is not something that just naturally occurs because we have people who are operating here on Talisman Sabre. It definitely does take effort to ensuring we're getting the best value out of having all of those capabilities in one location at one time.
So yeah, you talked about multi-domain operations, and you just made the argument that it's far larger and more complex than anyone could sort of fathom, and the largest that we've done. There will be a number of people that deployed in combat brigades, and I want to take a brief pause to say that this is the first time one div has been entirely in the field at the same time as well, which seems like it's like a really unique thing and an amazing opportunity for on Exercise Talisman 2025. But if we come back to sort of some people may have deployed and they'd be sitting there thinking, I'm definitely like a small cog in a larger machine, but I'm not quite sure what everyone else is doing. If we zoom out a bit and ignore that Army thinks they're the main effort, right, and we think we're the main effort, let's go to the other domains. What sort of largest sort of scale stuff has been happening in the other domains across Exercise Talisman Sabre 2025?
We've seen some awesome activities happening across the exercise area, across all domains, and I'm happy to talk to some of the achievements that we've seen from the land domain a little bit later if need be.
Yeah.
But certainly when it comes to air, significant operations occurring in Northern Australia. Air Force over the last few years in particular has really been getting itself comfortable to operating in Northern Australia at less comfortable locations, so more austere environments, pushing out further west to places like RAF Base Curtin and RAF Base Learmonth. And as part of that as well, exercising what Air Force terms to be as agile operations. So quite often if you're deploying a squadron of fighters to a location, it comes with an entire rock show worth of people and equipment. We recognise, Air Force recognises that that's not always achievable, particularly in this region and particularly with some of the situations we might find ourselves in within the future. So agile operations that were exercised on Talisman Sabre involved things like forward arming and refuelling points being established at places like RAF Base Learmonth to, as it says in the name, rearm those jets ready to enter the fight again and leapfrog forward through the battle space, which in itself is, it takes significant effort to plan, but as well to then ensure that that can happen safely within the exercise construct.
Because I think you talked about before how difficult it is for partner nations to come to us and operate here. We still have our own challenges with operating in these sort of remote bases up to the north. We're not in the wet season currently, but there's a number of times where they'll get cut off and you can't transport stuff up to them to provide that refueling and rearming and stuff. It's a mammoth effort to get to all these northern isolated bases and stuff as well.
It's a significant effort. And, we can't just always go with the known route in and out of some of these locations. And we certainly saw during the conduct of this exercise, MSRs being cut off for reasons that were beyond our control. Something as, simple as a vehicular accident on a major road within one of those areas can cut off our forces for a period of time, and that's in a benign environment. So we have to be prepared that in order to achieve the outcome at some of these austere locations, we do have to think outside of the box. We certainly saw with regard to the land domain the use of sea lift as an example to assist in moving large numbers of vehicles from southern Victoria up into the exercise area. Noting that the effort to move those vehicles via other means, particularly through remote parts of Australia, can sometimes be difficult. And if not difficult, it just takes a long time to do when you're chucking them on the back of semi-trailers or trains.
Yeah, so you said that quite sort of blasé in terms of like this happened and changed the whole thing and then we just replanned. You're at the helm, right? So you're in the exercise control. At some points, were you pulling your hair out and being like, how are we going to get this to work, or replanning things multiple times? And how difficult was it being inside the hot seat, being like people sort of breathing down your neck, being like, let's make it work no matter what type thing? Yeah,
I think there's probably a few listeners here that have sat in a 3-shop or in a 3-3 type function where the world is running down around you and you're just trying to find solutions to problems that sometimes seem to be quite wicked in nature. We had a couple of instances within the exercise where we had to fight through challenges that were insurmountable, or at least felt insurmountable, in order to achieve the outcome. Certainly in deploying to places like Christmas Island, weather is unpredictable. Sometimes aircraft serviceability can become just as unpredictable. In order to reach places that are a long way away, you have to operate within a finite window of time in order to achieve that.
So you've got all that complexity, and you're in the hot seat, sort of trying to make it all work. And then you've got partner nations, some of which have conflict in their own nations now. Like you've got people from Thailand, and obviously they've just gone into conflict with Cambodia and a subsequent ceasefire and stuff. We won't get into the technicalities of that because it's another episode in itself. But how many different things are layered on top of each other to make it your job so difficult in the hot seat?
Yeah, so across a theatre level activity like Talisman Sabre, quite often you're having to bring many different people and capabilities to bear at the same point in time in order to achieve the effect, or in this case, in order to achieve the combined joint training outcome. The example you just provided is certainly one of those that come into our consideration within the operations room. There's certainly been other events happening worldwide that we've had to keep an eye on because we're operating with countries from all over the world. Things that seem far away in a context of an Australian exercise can suddenly seem very close when you're dealing with international partners from places like Northern Europe, continental United States, and closer to home as well. I'll tell you one example that doesn't necessarily relate to conflict, but certainly what we saw very recently was a earthquake occurring off the east coast of Russia, which led to a tidal wave warning across almost the entire Indo-Pacific region. At the same time, we have got forces operating on the northern side of PNG. So I can tell you that in the last 24 hours, I've gone through a bunch of contingency plans with the elements operating on the north coast of PNG to understand exactly what that tidal wave warning meant and how we could take actions to ensure the safety of the exercise participants operating in that region. And I can certainly attest to the fact that we didn't cover off on actions on tidal wave during the planning conference.
I could imagine. Yeah. But you're talking about something that happens so far north affecting operations on I suppose that's the scale of the exercise. I've cut you off from the RAF component, or the air component, which was operating under your agile component in the northern bases. If we come back to the next domain and sort of go through some of the wins that we had and some of the things we were trying to achieve in another domain, maritime, where do we get after and what do we get done?
Yeah. Can I just very quickly step back to Air Force?
Yeah, absolutely.
There's probably a couple of facts that I should have mentioned as part of Air Force, and that is the rate of effort for our operations for Talisman Sabre was, again, a difficult number to comprehend, with almost 300 aircraft operating across the exercise area at any one time, undertaking at its peak 200 sorties per day, with a total of 2,000 sorties across the entire exercise.
Insane.
It's massive rate of effort. And it's not just getting those jets into the air to do what they do at the pointy end of the spear. It's all of the effort in establishing the air bases for them to operate from, and then ensuring that logistics pipeline is plugged into the back of that air base to continue to sustain operations across that operating window.
Yeah, absolutely wild. And so that's the Air Force or the air component. Let's go to the maritime component.
Yeah, sorry, you got me stuck talking about Air Force.
No, that's
we'll
good.
Talk
it's
about
natural.
Maritime
Yeah.
Okay, so maritime, again, significant commitments from across Australia and partner nations. Maritime typically split up for Talisman Sabre across the Northwest Shelf and East Coast Australia. So for those on social media, particularly following the Talisman Sabre webpage or the Facebook page, probably would have seen the contribution from both the US and UK with regards to the carrier strike groups. We had HIMARS Prince of Wales with the UK carrier strike group alongside USS George Washington from the US carrier strike group. The fact that we had two carriers alongside for Talisman Sabre was awesome in itself. The plan that went into that by the maritime component to ensure that we could achieve training outcomes, whilst it might seem you've got a whole bunch of resources that you can achieve things quite easily, but it's ensuring that you've actually then designed the activities to achieve best value with having those resources in the region. And I can attest from what I've seen out of the maritime component, particularly in that Northwest Shelf, they certainly did achieve that. And as I mentioned before, we achieved some real good multi-domain integration between the air component operating in that area and the air components operating off both of those carriers within that region, which is, again, it's a great news story for Australia, but more broadly for our US and UK partners in deploying those elements down here. Again, with regard to the maritime component, as I mentioned, they had forces operating off the East Coast. Those forces were more open to our non-traditional partners. So we certainly had elements from the Republic of Korea, Japan, and France, alongside Australian and US ships, in addition to New Zealand ships. The majority of their effort was in the public domain, focused on the conduct of combined joint force entry in terms of amphibious operations in northern Queensland, up vicinity of Cali Beach training area, which I'm sure some of your listeners are familiar with, and then further down south vicinity of Shorewater Bay training area. That activity in itself involved 8 amphibious ships, 8,000 sailors and soldiers on board embarked as part of the amphibious task force, 46 aircraft. Like, it's a humongous activity just in itself, and it's just one snippet of Talisman Sabre. It's just one snippet of the maritime component that was operating as part of the exercise. In addition to those amphibious operations, those ships were also at times conducting various naval manoeuvres. I'm not fully au fait with my naval terminology, but certainly conducting surface-to-surface type activities with their vessels, in addition to anti-submarine type activities with their vessels. And as well, laid over the top of that, we saw P8s operating out of Townsville, joining in with the maritime component in undertaking anti-submarine warfare off the East Coast, which again is another awesome thing to see. And quite often you don't get to see these activities, or at least these capabilities, come together until you have a major exercise such as Talisman Sabre.
We've done air and now maritime domains. If we talk about space and cyber, obviously you probably won't be able to talk a lot about it, and that's absolutely fine. But like, what do we get? So what were the objectives for space and cyber, and what do we get after?
You'd certainly expect in 2025 to see increasing participation from both of those domains in an exercise like Talisman Sabre, and we did see that. Particularly with regard to space, we saw non-traditional partners operating together out of Townsville, undertaking commercial type operations and looking at space awareness type activities. And that, again, was a really good outcome to involve partners that we don't typically operate within the space domain with together, getting after and understanding exactly how they approach space operations, and as well being able to demonstrate some level of insight into how Australia, the US, and more traditional type partners operate in that domain. Cyber domain, much the same. It's an increasing level of interest from not just partner nations, but as well, I want to say it's nascent. It's probably not the right word to use, but certainly when it comes to an exercise like Talisman Sabre, there is some further work to be done to ensure that we're integrating the cyber domain across the other domains in achieving some of those combined joint training outcomes. Yeah,
absolutely. So that's 4 domains. We've left one off, and you said you'd come back to it. Can we talk about, the whole audience will want to know what we got after in the land domain? What do we achieve? You talked about amphibious operations, combining land and maritime up the East Coast. You talked about special forces or special operations in PNG. What did the land domain get after, and what did we achieve?
So I kind of alluded to it earlier before, and that is the land domain achieved some excellent outcomes here on Talisman Sabre. We, as you already mentioned, we saw the entire of the 1st Australian Division deploy into the field. We saw brigades operating in the Northern Territory in Bradshaw Field Training Area, across to North Queensland within the Townsville Field Training Area, further down south into Shorewater Bay Training Area. And then as the exercise progressed from the first week into the second week, we saw a redeployment of forces from across training areas to concentrate, particularly in vicinity of Shorewater Bay Training Area. And that in itself was a humongous effort for the 1st Australian Division to undertake a manoeuvre of the 1st Brigade out of Bradshaw Field Training Area via C-17 into Shorewater Bay Training Area to then force concentrate and continue the fight. At the same time, we're undertaking those movements. We were seeing the amphibious landings occur vicinity of Shoalwater Bay training area. So certainly for a good 96-hour period within Shoalwater Bay training area, we had the convergence of the 1st Australian Division occurring, and there was significant activity. As you could imagine, just the orchestration and scale of that is almost incomprehensible, particularly for us as the Australian Defence Force. Once you then start piling in a whole bunch of partner nations into that, and then on top of that, multi-domain integration with capabilities from Air Force and Navy. The scale is magnificent to see, particularly at a distance, maybe a little bit hard to comprehend on the ground if you're looking at the same tree across the course of the exercise. Yeah. But certainly, when you take a step back and just admire what was able to be achieved by Army, it was a sight to be seen. In addition to that, I'm led to, or at least I've been told, that this is the first time that we've seen a divisional headquarters dug in since the Second World War, and that was achieved as part of Talisman Sabre at Shoalwater Bay.
I saw some some of the social media around how they were dug in and using engineers and stuff. It looked absolutely like you said, hasn't been done in so long. I want to go back to your point where you're in the hot seat in the 3 shot, plug and holes and damage control, just so that we weave some maritime stuff in there. And you're just praying that things go the way they go and that they're synchronized, and you're like, please come off. Let's come back to lessons learned. There must be so many, but what are the sort of, for the last 10 minutes of the episode, let's really thrash out what lessons were learned from Talisman Sabre 2025.
Yeah, I'll probably try and cover off on a couple within this next little part of the chat, and that is the first one I learned personally, and I think more broadly across the headquarters, was the need to be persistent in our approach. Things will fail naturally, whether that's due to our own fault or due to things that are outside of our control.
Of which there are so many.
Weather, serviceability of aircraft, availability of supply routes. Using an example, we were undertaking live fires within the Bradshaw Field training area. Some awesome activities, long-range strike being a real hallmark of those activities. We saw windows disappear, again, due to no fault of our own. We had to work really hard across multiple components to bring things like ships back together and aircraft back into the fight to achieve a safe range setting for those shoots to occur. Certainly not saying that, in order to fire a missile that you need to have 2 warships sitting as a picket off the northwest shelf with a P8 providing a range clearance. That's not an essential requirement, but certainly for Talisman Sabre, those were the assets we had to bring to bear based on the time we had available to fit into a window to achieve something like a missile shoot.
It's insane. And have you got people in front of you or behind you that are like, I've got an idea? Is that where it gets to? Is like these creative ideas coming off the floor, being like, I'll ring this person and get this sorted, and sort of coming up with solutions on the fly?
I sometimes like to think of myself as an ideas man. Talisman Sabre challenged me, and I definitely had to reach out to other parts of the headquarters in order to gain an understanding as to what exactly was achievable within the time and space we had available. And thankfully, across the multinational component, and particularly within the ADF and across, my brothers and sisters from Army and Navy, everyone was able to sort of come together in those moments to assist in finding a solution to those sometimes very complicated problems.
That I could only imagine how that went in reality. So that's the first, I suppose, lesson learned. If we go to the next major lesson learned, what do we take away from it?
Yeah, so I think we kind of touched on the difficulty it is in getting to Australia. It's a long way to come for our partner nations in order to work with us on this exercise. Sometimes we forget about the distances, the sheer distances involved in moving forces from here in Gallipoli Barracks up further to whether it's, Shoalwater Bay training area. Whilst it seems close, for some of our partner nations, they think it's, an hour's drive up the road. They think they can head up there for lunch and then come back down. It's getting people to understand the sheer scale of the geography within this region. As we start pushing further west, that scale becomes even greater when we start talking about, heading south out of Darwin and then out to Bradshaw Field training area. Again, that's, using a land perspective, but when we start pushing aircraft out to places like Christmas Island. Again, the scale of the geography and the kilometres we're speaking about are difficult to comprehend. And it's not until you've actually done an activity like Talisman Sabre that sometimes you can appreciate some of the challenges that are involved in deploying into some of those far reaches of not just Australia, but our immediate region.
Yeah, it's just absolutely huge. We talked about it before with in terms of main supply routes getting cut off or like trying to make it work. Lieutenant Colonel Steve Young in one of his episodes spoke about if you overlaid Australia onto Europe and you talked about how far Sydney and Perth are away from each other, most Europeans would be like, that can't be right because it is so far. And you don't really realise how austere some of that environment is between those 2 points until you get here and start trying to move. It's still it's incredibly hard for us and even more difficult for partner nations. That's an awesome lesson learnt. Anything else? Is that it?
No, I'll cover off on connectivity. So in probably two facets, the first part being just connectivity of comms. Again, it's not until you've deployed to some of those regions that you have a full appreciation for how hard it is to fight for comms and how reliant we can become on deployed systems, of which in some cases are relatively finite. So what that then incurs upon the force is a need to limit the nature of broadcasting that they're undertaking. You can't just pick up the phone or send an email like you might normally do. You have to really focus the time you have available with those strategic comms to ensure that you're passing the right information at the right time. And then when you can't achieve those comms, it's ensuring you actually understand the plan that you're part of so that you can continue the fight without having to reach back to a senior commander to double check whether you have the information accurate, or if the situation has changed, that you can continue to operate within commander's intent and achieve the outcome of the mission. And in an exercise context, we certainly saw that. Obviously, safety always takes paramount precedence in everything that we're doing, but we didn't always have all means of communications available, and we certainly had to employ our PACE plan on a number of occasions to ensure that we could reach out and touch each one of our exercise safety areas throughout the conduct of this exercise. So that's one part of connectivity. The other part of connectivity I spoke about is just the connectivity with the local I say environment, but it's local communities and access to local industry. Once you start moving further north and further west, you don't have access to the everyday conveniences that you would typically find. And especially for some of our more complicated capability systems, we don't have access to some of our deep level maintenance facilities that we would typically have. So there's a lot of effort that has to go into planning to ensure that as we start to push some of these more complicated capabilities further forward to get closer to a potential fight, that we have catered for the needs of those capabilities, whether it's specific highly technical spare parts, or whether it's highly trained potential civilians or contractors to assist in maintaining those pieces of kit and equipment to ensure that whilst we need it up there in the far reaches of Northern Australia, we can actually continue to sustain that capability in the way that it's intended to be sustained.
Yeah, so you talked about connectivity, and you talked about relying on, which is an awesome point for an Army officer to say that we're relying on control measures and PACE plans and clear commander's intent. If we come back to, I just rattled off all the partner nations that have come and incredibly enthusiastic to be a part of the exercise. How difficult, we still have, we work with the United States and United Kingdom and Five Eyes countries more broadly. How difficult it is to get everyone on the same net and give them the information they need to get after the training objectives they're trying to achieve as well, and incorporate all of those partner nations into your command posts, but into the orders more broadly, and that connectivity and passing information.
I do not envy the role of our exercise J6. I'm surprised that guy has any hair left after the last 2 years worth of planning and trying to integrate 19 partner nations across the course of not just conducting the exercise, but as I've just alluded to, planning the activity itself. We are not blessed with the most open ICT system for good reason. I think most people would understand that there's a need to ensure that our ICT systems are secure.
Yeah. You're constantly balancing the security of it, but versus how user-friendly it is or how easy it is to pass information. That's a constant tension that the J6 obviously has felt for the last 2 years. Yeah.
It's a significant tension, and we've looked at avenues to try and alleviate some of that pressure that we're feeling. Obviously, there's a thirst for information from our partner nations coming into an exercise like Talisman Sabre to understand understand exactly what it is that they need to bring and be prepared for. And it can sometimes be difficult to share that information with them using some of the more conventional information sharing tools that we typically use. We can't just get access to Objective for or any of our partner nations really from back home. Even things like Microsoft Teams, whilst it seems like a really great idea, you soon realise that you can actually only talk to other people within the Australian Department of Defence using our Microsoft Teams. So we've started to look at what other options are available to assist us in collaborating with them, certainly at the official level, which for the most part is where Talisman Sabre is planned as an activity. But if you look at the strategic environment, there is a need for us to be able to undertake that planning and consultation and coordination with our partner nations at a higher classification level. And some of the solutions that we're looking at are creative. We're looking at how maritime forces operate and communicate, how ships communicate and share classified information. And we've certainly started to trial some of those capabilities here as part of exercise control for Talisman Sabre.
Yeah. I think that's an awesome place to wrap that up in terms of integrating partner nations and all of the lessons learned. We've talked about sort of objectives and how this was different to the last exercise Talisman Sabre. We've talked about what we got after and what we actually did. You broke it down into each of the domains, and then we talked about the lessons learned. I suppose before we close off the episode, and you're probably still right in the sort of beaten zone for Talisman Sabre 25, and you're completely focused on the current. But if we look out, what's next for Talisman Sabre?
We're already talking about Talisman Sabre 2027. That may be a surprise. It may not be a surprise to you. But while we have everyone in the room with some very fresh lessons identified, we want to make sure that we can actually learn those lessons. So we're looking to turn them around as quick as we can to start looking at the concept for Talisman Sabre 2027. There is probably a bit of a sense of wanting to always be bigger and better. But I'm not sure from a personal perspective that bigger is always better. I think there's some work that needs to be done to understand exactly what types of capabilities we want to bring together as part of Talisman Sabre. And if we reflect back on briefly things like the National Defence Strategy, talking about a focused and integrated force, I think there's potentially some work that can be done to focus what it is that Talisman Sabre 2027 is getting after. Certainly, that's not up to me. I take my guidance from my boss, and Talisman Sabre is, directed to us by the Vice Chief of Defence Force through the Chief of Joint Operations. So those two gentlemen in this case will get the opportunity to decide exactly what Talisman Sabre 2027 looks like. But as we look to influence those concepts moving forward, I would suggest that Talisman Sabre may be a more focused activity in terms of how we achieve multi-domain integration. But I would suggest as well that we're probably not going to constrain ourselves to the same geography that we have for 2025. There may be a look to broaden wherever we can to ensure that we have a sense of understanding of other parts of the terrain within the Australian mainland and potentially other external territories like we saw this year with Christmas Island.
Absolutely huge and awesome to look forward to. That's a wrap on Talisman Sabre 25. Squadron Leader Zac Smit, thank you so much for coming on, sir. It's been absolutely awesome.
Thank you, Todd. I appreciate you having another Raffy on the show.
Perfect,
and I appreciate you dragging me out of the operations room. I really need some sunlight.
You get a break and you probably need leave right now, but it should be good. Yeah. Thanks so much.
Cheers.
Thanks for listening to the Cove Podcast. Explore our channel for more great audio PME content. Also, visit us at cove.army.gov.au for hundreds of additional resources. The Cove, the learning home of the Australian profession of arms.